a commission meeting, and looks like the first thing we have is public comments.
Yes, we do have a public comment, and it looks like Albert is here. So Albert, I'm gonna let you into the meeting and you can provide your public comment.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Hey. All right. Well, I'm here to say hello, and it's been a little while. I feel like I'm coming to church. It's been 6 months since my last confession. Let's see. I tried to put on my neighborhood tree planting shirt from 2008 this morning, 2006. I couldn't fit into it, unfortunately, but I thought that would be fun to show you. I guess I could show it to you. But anyway, this time of year, normally for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, I would be calling people in my community to see if they wanted to plant trees, whether they wanted to receive a tree at their house or if they wanted to participate in volunteering to plant trees in our community. And I did that in Beaumont Wilshire neighborhood for a number of years, Kearns neighborhood 1 year, Irvington for 3 years, and then I think I did it in Richmond as well. And so that was part of my volunteer time during those years. And then that would lead to a day, usually a weekend, where 3 neighborhoods would be planted on one day and 3 neighborhoods would be planted on the next day. And through that effort, people would be brought together to plant trees in our neighborhoods. And there would often be 100 people gathered on a Saturday, usually at a church, to have some donated baked goods and coffee and tea. And meanwhile, Friends of Trees team leaders would be organizing the trees in pickup trucks in a parking lot. And then we would go out and spend a few hours planting trees around the neighborhood. Oftentimes we would make t-shirts for the event. A lot of the trees were planted by kids, lots of kids. And so it was this amazing collection of different aged people coming together to improve our neighborhoods and get to know one another. For the last 4 years or so, that has not been happening because of the lack of contract with Friends of Trees, who do this work in that way. And not only has that led to less trees being planted in our communities, but it has also removed the need for people like me to do the kinds of coordination that I was doing. It also has removed thousands of young people from getting to know older people, creating community, improving our canopy, planting trees, getting to know what different kinds of trees are like. And I first started doing this work when I moved to Seattle in 1995. I learned that the city was giving away free street trees to any houses that wanted them. And the neighborhood I lived in was one of those neighborhoods that didn't have a lot of trees. And so it was just going door to door and asking people if they wanted trees. And it wasn't always an easy sell. It was kind of interesting. I learned a lot because not every household wanted trees, even though they were free, but many did. And now when I go back to that neighborhood, or actually a couple different neighborhoods in Seattle where I did this, the trees are 30 years old and are towering and are majestic and glorious. And same thing for the trees that we all planted together in Portland. You know, I think over the time, I heard that Friends of Trees is now about to plant its 1,000th tree. And, you know, there's really something special about planting a forest where you live. And I'm so appreciative of the forest we do have here. My main concern is that we are really missing an opportunity to not only plant more trees here, which I think is a dire need given climate change right now. But I think we also are missing the boat on the community building aspect of the way that trees were planted and the way that different age people were involved in the effort. And so I am coming before you once again to repeat that I think that you all are sitting on a lot of money right now. And I don't understand why we're about to miss another tree planting season. I know you have free trees that you're giving away to people, and I love that. And that doesn't really make it, in my mind, comparatively to the experience that I and thousands of other people were having here for many years. So whatever it takes, I'd really like to see that contract up again as soon as possible. I really am saddened to see that it looks like we're about to miss the fourth planting season in a row where we're not using that system of tree planting. And I know that very soon things are going to probably get better, but there's no reason to not be planting trees right now, in my mind. And I really wish that that message was getting through, and I hope that you'll take my comments to heart. And thank you for all the good work that you do. I know that, Urban Forestry has been staffing up, and I'm sure that's leading to lots of great things that I don't know about. And also just, heck, I'd love to see the Urban Forestry staff be gigantic. Like, I think there's a lot to be done here. And, hopefully that will also lead to tree planting, which so far does not feel like it's anywhere on pace compared to the amount of money that is in your coffers. So thanks for hearing me. Have a good one.
Thank you very much, Albert, for your valuable comments. And we're hoping that you could stay for some of the meeting because there may be some really interesting information for you. If not, you could get to the minutes later.
Yeah, I'll probably be checking out the minutes. I have another meeting to go to. But I'd also say I knew that you have something to report, and I wish that was before I spoke. But anyway, that's the way it worked out.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to move on to the meeting minutes approval. So can I get a motion for approving those? Or any comments about them? Yeah. Bruce.
This is Bruce Nelson. For those of you who are watching this via Zoom where you can't see names of people that are in the room. I went through the notes, and city staff present, I think it's helpful if for city staff you say what bureau they're a part of for the historical records. Let's see. On the City Forester's report number 4, the wordings under the second line, City Council will vote to remove the sunset date from the amendment on November 20th. To me, that wording sounds awkward, but I understand what you're trying to say, but they're not vote. It just seems awkward, but it's not a life changer. On the second page, under Vibrant Communities polling update, Todd Lofgren, number A, historically, Portland's park system has historically been funded by voters enacting bonds and levies. I don't believe that's accurate. The general fund supplies a great deal of the budget dollars, so it's a combination of general budget dollars, general fund, and levies and bond. If I'm incorrect in that, I'm sure I'll be corrected. On number D, or letter D, the capital maintenance backlog is growing. I believe it would be informative for people who might look at these historically to give a number for that. Is it 700 million? Is it 800 million? Is it 100 million? The minutes reflect the historical record that may be accessible to people in the future. And so I think when there is a number, I think that should be there, even if it's an estimate. You can say that in the minutes. Let's see. On the third page, when you refer to Laura Lehman, Marshall Johnson, Rachel Felice, and Jill Van Winkle, I think you need to say what agency they are part of, what their job title is. Again, it's hard for someone who's reading these to know who the heck are these people. And I don't believe that is completely clear in the beginning when you say city staff present. Again, you need to say what bureau they're part of, I think. So that's as far as I got. I ran out of time.
Any other comments about the minutes? Okay, does anybody, is there any objection to kind of slight modifications that were suggested or?
I think most of those are fine. I will say in general, we try not to put information into the minutes that aren't mentioned in the meeting. The
Yeah,
minutes
yeah,
are
yeah.
a record of what was discussed and stated, so we try not to like add information that's not part of the meeting. But I think in terms of like noting which bureau staff are with and things like that, of course, we could do that and clarify some of the other language that you pointed out also.
Okay, any motion to approve with the slight modification that's agreed to? Motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes with
Okay.
those edits.
Thank you. Second? Okay, second. Okay, all in favor? Great. Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? Okay, one abstention. Okay, great. Let's move on to the city forester report.
Thank you, Chairperson Feldstein. I have for y'all today like 6 items. First, Arbor Day was celebrated last Saturday on the 12th at Glenfair Park at Northeast 144th Street in East Portland. This was Portland's 135th Arbor Day. And it was really great to see Commissioner Lilly there, and thank you for making the time, JR. Approximately 235 folks attended, including many children and young people. 243 yard trees were given away with the help of 7 volunteers, so more trees than people by a couple dozen. 10 trees were planted by 50 volunteers. There were 40 bucket truck rides into the tree canopy, face painting, tree-themed arts, crafts, and games, including with local partners. And also 100 tamales, 180 pieces of fry bread, and 80 banh mi sandwiches were given away. Portland received the Tree City USA designation for the 48th year, and the Bill Nato Community Trees Award was presented to Mr. Ed Washington. So it was a lovely sunny event, and thanks again to all of you who participated. Second item is a friendly reminder that the large tree amendment is scheduled to be heard by City Council on Wednesday, the 13th of November, so before our November commission meeting. That is scheduled for 3:00 p.m. Thank you, Commissioner Vandemark, for providing testimony on behalf of the Urban Forestry Commission. Now is the time for interested parties to send their comments to City Council members and the council record. And if they wish to request testimony time for the agenda, the information on how to do those things are on the large tree amendment webpage. They're linked there. Also, we'll be putting a one-pager on the large tree amendment in the chat for you all to use. It is a brief summary of the data surrounding that proposed amendment. And reminder, that amendment is to remove the expiration date that is currently in the tree code, so that the practice is currently in place regarding higher mitigation for larger trees in private property development situations continues. Next item, yesterday you received a link from Brian Lando on a recent City Ombuds report that was released and picked up by various media outlets, and I expect you may have seen that media coverage before Brian's email. You also received via email the memo about that situation that the city provided to the Ombuds office to inform their research. I'll refer you to that for quite extensive and detailed information about the situation the Ombuds office chose to pursue. The information that the Ombuds office publicized was factually incorrect and did not reflect the information provided by Urban Forestry and the Vibrant Community Service Area. The Ombudsman's office is an elected official office that is not overseen by the city. And again, as commissioners, you may get questions or concerns about that media coverage and that report, and hopefully that memo will help you. Third item for you all, fourth. While complaints about government are often what gets media attention, in fact, the city's trees single point of contact and urban forestry also receive many unsolicited thank yous and appreciation. Portlanders email and call in to express appreciation for trees, for the urban forest, for city tree regulations, and for urban forestry services and efforts. And you may hear some details about this in the planting report that will be presented today. A couple of recent examples include property owners thanking urban forestry for visiting the trees the property owners were required to plant as a permit condition. The Port of Portland about the, quote, from the port, exceptional staff, customer service, professionalism, and transparency, unquote, they receive related to their programmatic permit. And recently a neighborhood tree stewards participant promoted that program now in its 27th year at a lecture hosted by the Oregon Historical Society and World Forestry Center. So big thank you to the dedicated public servants and tree people who do that work every day. Also to the Parks Levy and other funding that are a critical foundation for that work. And all the organizations and partners who support and work with urban forestry. Next item, it being autumn, urban forestry is preparing for winter and recently issued through Vibrant Communities a press release to help property owners engage in some tree maintenance and preparation for the winter. We'll also put that in the chat in case you didn't get to see it and want to use it. We'll also put a one-pager in the chat that we put together for city officials and programs reference and use about storm response and tree impacts. In that one-pager, which I encourage you to take a look at, it's a one-pager to be brief, even though that one might be two. So it's short, but there's a statistic in there that's pretty informative that's based on last year's January storm. And basically what that statistic means is while of course impactful branch and tree failures are unfortunate and disturbing, they're very infrequent. As commissioners, you can help your friends, neighbors, organizations recognize this important context and hopefully also encourage property owners to engage experienced, qualified arborists to inspect and care for trees correctly, to identify and reduce risks so that those property owners can enjoy decades of trees and the services and benefits they provide. And as always, reminder, folks who have tree emergency situations or other tree related questions should please contact the city's trees single point of contact. Last item for you all. Our Science Outreach and Planting Programs Manager, Angie DeSalvo, is here today to present the latest information about the city's tree planting efforts. Urban forestry currently plants over 3,500 trees annually. That's more than the city of Portland has ever planted before. Planting is across virtually all property ownership types and not limited. It's on private property, it's in public rights of way, on city-owned property, other publicly owned property, and it's also through various programs and partnerships. The planting is intentionally in the lower canopy, lower income, and more diverse communities of Portland, which have been deprived of services like trees in the past. Urban forestry's planting programs are successful. There are high volumes of new trees specifically in those focus areas. Many are also established by the city, and they're in the right locations for long and productive tree lives. The species are intentionally diverse, they're climate resilient, and they are medium and large form trees. Those are the longest lived, give the most services, and help reduce canopy loss from pest and pathogen infestations such as emerald ash borer, Dutch elm disease, and other threats. The survival rate continues to be high despite challenges, a whopping 95% survival rate. And community feedback shows strong support for the programs. The work is transparent. Our online report includes specific information and continues to be updated annually. And this is truly hopeful stuff for a future city in a forest, for anti-racism and equity, for climate action, for public health. So I'm pleased that Angie was able to come today and will be presenting detailed information to y'all. I encourage you to share the good news through your networks and through your organizations. I encourage you to ask your tree planting questions today while Angie's here. And last but not least, thank you to Angie and our skilled planting teams for all their good work. That concludes my report. If anyone has questions, I'll be happy to try to answer.
Commissioner Meisner.
Hi, thank you, Forestry Cairo. I have a question about the Ombudsman's report, because I feel like for quite a while we've been getting told that the city is going to be taking over the tree maintenance, as well as the PISA funds that were approved for tree maintenance. So, but when I read the report, it like brought up the city code that said that property owners are still responsible for adjacent tree maintenance. And so I just was hoping to get some clarification on why that is. Is like is the city able to pick and choose what street tree maintenance they do? Or I guess like I'm just curious like what the difference is.
Great. That's a great question, Commissioner Meisner. Thanks for asking that, because I'm guessing it might not be clear to others. So the City of Portland's policy for a very long time has been that adjacent property owners are responsible for maintaining street trees. That is still the city's policy. It's in the city code. As of July 1st, so just a couple months ago, Urban Forestry for the first time received some starter funds to begin to assume responsibility for street tree maintenance. As you might imagine, there are around 250,000 street trees. There's a lot that needs to be done before the city can actually begin to do the street tree maintenance for the adjacent property owners. And meantime, the policy and code remains the same. It is still the adjacent property owner's responsibility. So as we've discussed in this room before, and certainly can and probably will again, what we're working on now that funding, that's been a long time in the making to get that initial funding. But now that we have some of that, we're starting with developing positions and doing hiring for people who will build that program. The program does not exist. It needs to be built first. We'll also be piloting it because the funds that we're given are not enough to take on full street tree maintenance for the whole city. We'll be basically trying it out, learning from that, and using that to request, if necessary, further funds so that we can do all of the street tree maintenance in the city. So you won't actually see the city doing proactive street tree maintenance for a few years yet because we have to build all of that. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much for the answer.
You're welcome.
Question actually in follow-up to that. So has it been thought about prioritizing the implementation? Just curious about that, who or what or that type of thing.
Yeah, we haven't spent a lot of time on that yet. The upshot is all of the folks that currently work at Urban Forestry have full-time jobs. So we're gonna hire people whose job it will be to do things like figure out what's the most appropriate pilot. What should the criteria and characteristics of that pilot program be so that we can learn what our bigger program should be.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
So I'm gonna spin that a little. So we expect to be hiring great, experienced, skilled new people over the next year plus. So help us spread the word about that, because having good people in those positions is absolutely essential to being successful.
Yeah. Commissioner Plack.
Hi, I feel like I should know the answer to this, so I apologize because you've probably said this already in the past, but are we going to look at changing that code as part of the Title 11 changes in the not so distant future?
Good question. Sure. Yeah, great question. A lot of it has to do with how the timing of program implementation lines up with that project. It would be great if the two lined up well together, which they actually, I think there's a good chance they will. But if we're not prepared to fully assume responsibility, if we don't have the staff in place, don't have the contractors in place, we would hold off on that. So it could end up being a standalone where we bring that amendment later, or we pass it and there's an implementation date a few years out to again allow for the program to get built, but also all the funding to be securely in place.
Good. Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, and Brian, I might follow up with you, and maybe you're saying this and I didn't understand, but in some ways, until we have dedicated long-term funding, I would actually say it's irresponsible to change that, you know, so I think it's like, I would think that maybe if we're having, you know, some funding, maybe there's a smaller modification, but it feels like we have to have a larger change and still work toward the goal of dedicated long-term funding before changing the code, because if we change the code before we have the ability to actually do the maintenance, we've put the
Yes.
proverbial cart before the horse.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just as I think we've said this before, but we requested about $100 million over 5 years to implement that program. We received about 65 over 5 years. So good chunk of money, great work to be done in terms of doing a pilot, building things out, but we've communicated that to PSEP, and PSEP understands that yes, more money will be needed going forward to make this a citywide program.
And I'll mention, because Brian rightly said 5 years. The intention is this for to be ongoing.
Yeah.
In perpetuity. However, that's not how budgets work. And the 5 years is actually a longer time frame than the city's regular budget timeframes, which are annual. But the intention is for it to be ongoing, much like the levy is a 5-year levy. However, Parks and City Council are considering renewing that. You heard about the polling for that recently.
I had a question on the heritage tree that was removed, the why. I'm trying to understand, my understanding of why the justification for urban forestry removing it is that a portion of the trunk was on public and right-of-way space, and since it's a heritage tree, urban forestry assumes maintenance of heritage trees that are in public space. So is that right? Is
That's
that
it.
the justification?
You've got it. That's as per city code and has been that way for quite a while.
Because if it was on private property and it was shared tree, the expense would be shared by both property owners. At least that was what was suggested when the large redwood needed to be removed near Prescott and 12th, I think it was there. So, but apparently because it's in that language in the code, that is putting all the responsibility on the city. And has the city also pruned that tree in the past? Has that been the city's expense?
It has for as long as the tree in some part was in right of way. They're about, Sam might know this better than I. There are a little over 300 heritage trees, and about half of those are on city-owned property or public rights of way, and therefore are maintained by urban forestry according to the city's law.
Okay, thank you.
Move us on, because we're, 5 minutes over, 1:30, 10-second comment though. So reading the ombudsman letter and that type of thing, and I think what you're referring to, I just wondered about thinking about prioritizing areas of ambiguity for the public, you know what I mean, as we take over street tree maintenance. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other factors to prioritize, but it's just one thought. So, yeah. Anyway, let's see, we are gonna move on to the heritage tree number 16 removal approval.
Share my screen. You know if it's visible to everybody. All right, hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Wolf. I go by Sam. I'm the Heritage Tree Program Manager. I'm a botanics specialist in Urban Forestry Science and Policy Work Group, and I manage our Heritage Tree Program. We have one presentation today where we will cover a Heritage Tree removal request for Heritage Tree number 116, followed by a UFC hearing and vote. I will be assisted today by Jesse Nellis, our Senior Urban Forestry Non-Development Tree Inspector. So today, we'll begin with a brief overview of the heritage tree removal process before discussing the one single request today. I'll introduce the tree, and Jesse will cover who reviewed the case will present his findings. And then the UFC will have opportunity to discuss, hear public comment, and vote on the request before after the presentation. So heritage trees are recognized for their size, age, historical association, and horticultural value. And they're of special importance to the city. They are designated by City Council and are required to be preserved and are considered to have the greatest protection a tree can have. Important. Like many living things, heritage trees decline over time. And due to their size and location, physical removal of the trees may be necessary to ensure safety. So there are two scenarios of tree removal described in Title 11. Subsection F describes the process of heritage tree removals during non-emergency situations. And then subsection I refers to emergency situations. So the presentation we're presenting today is following subsection F, where we have a property owner where we have a right-of-way tree where Urban Forestry has requested removal to the UFC. So in this process, the UFC shall hold a public hearing and then vote for or against the removal, and then consent to remove shall be supported by at least 6 members of the UFC. So here is a map illustrating the location of Heritage Tree 116. It is a butternut located within the Southeast Selwood Moreland neighborhood. The map indicates the relative concentration of heritage trees in each neighborhood across the city. And so the darker the color, the more heritage trees are located there. Heritage Tree 116 is located in the right of way. And the neighborhood currently has 13 heritage trees. This neighborhood lost 2 Oregon white oaks in the ice storm last year, but it gained a new Oregon white oak just this year. Pass it over to Jeff.
Morning, UFC members. The tree in question is a butternut that was designated as a heritage tree in 1996. It's located in the right-of-way adjacent to 1584 Southeast Lexington Street. This tree is located under high voltage lines, and due to the required high voltage pruning by the utility companies, the tree has not been allowed to grow true to its species form, which normally would be a medium to large tree of 40 to 60 feet tall. This slide shows the northern and southern sides of the tree. The tree does have a green canopy. However, the southern side of the tree's trunk has structural concerns, which we will go over in more detail a little later in the presentation. Recent emails and calls from the neighbors have requested health inspections based on the neighbors concerned with the condition of this tree. The tree has a long history of high voltage pruning, which has kept the tree at a shorter height, but created overextended limbs. The adjacent property owner has pruned the tree various times. A health inspection by Urban Forestry for Heritage Tree 116 was done in March 2024 and revealed that the tree was in poor condition. A second health inspection was requested to confirm findings and was completed in June 2024. As mentioned, the main concern with heritage tree number 116 is the bole of the tree. This is the area on the trunk of the tree from the ground up into the main limbs. There is a wound on the trunk that is 3 feet wide and runs 8 feet up 1 leader and 10 feet up the other leader. There's a large crack forming between the codominant union, right between the 2 large limbs. Bark is separating from the trunk of the tree in many locations around the main trunk and the limbs. There is evidence of advanced decay in the trunk of the tree, which could be easily seen where the wood is turning into brittle and crumbly pieces, and probing tools can be pushed into certain parts of the tree where there is advanced decay. The tree does have some wound wood in certain places, which is the tree's attempt to heal over a wound by putting on new wood fiber over that wound. The wound wood is not consistent, and the decayed area is now too large for this tree to contain. The tree condition and lack of ability to compartmentalize the decay and close the wound indicates poor vigor in this tree, and the tree can be considered to be in poor condition. There's the area and the crack. Since this is a heritage tree, our first consideration is to see what mitigation options there are to retain the tree and keep the right-of-way safe. Some industry accepted mitigation options are considered here, but due to the condition of the tree, they are not truly viable options to make the tree safe. Some pruning options could be end weight reduction pruning and crown reduction to reduce the weight on the main limbs and reduce the stress placed on the decayed area of the trunk. The problem with this is that too much canopy would have to be taken off to reduce the weight enough to reduce the risk of large sections of the tree failing into the right-of-way. Due to the advanced decay, cabling is not really a viable option to support the codominant union. This is because cabling is used to support trees that have fairly healthy wood that needs to be structurally supported. It's not recommended to install a supplemental support system or cabling system in a tree with advanced decay in such a large area. Even if pruned, the tree still has a risk of failure since the decay along with the crack is at the main trunk where the tree splits into the 2 leaders. Preservation options were considered for this tree, but the inspection found that heritage tree number 116 is not a candidate for those options. The inspection found that the tree did not qualify for an emergency tree removal, but was found to be in poor condition with advanced decay and is recommended for removal. Heritage tree 116 is in an advanced state of decline and is considered to be as dying. Title 11 defines a dying tree as a tree that is in an advanced state of decline because it is rotting and cannot be saved by reasonable treatment or pruning. As mentioned in the previous slides, there are not viable mitigation options that would leave this tree safe to remain in the right-of-way. There are many targets in the area, which include pedestrians and vehicles using the sidewalk and street, along with the adjacent house on private property. Considering the targets, along with the lack of mitigation options, Urban Forestry recommends that heritage tree number 116 be removed from the right-of-way. This concludes my section of the presentation, so I'll pass it back to Sam to finish the discussion.
Thanks, Jeff.
And we're running about 5 minutes behind, so yeah, if we could, yeah.
Okay, so next steps is for Urban Forestry Commission to discuss, ask questions. We'll provide public comments on 116, and then we'll conduct the motion to remove request.
Thank you, excellent. Any discussion or questions? Okay, anyone would like to make a motion for tree removal?
I move that we accept the recommendation of forestry to remove this tree.
Second, any seconds?
I can second it.
Thanks, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? Okay, full approval. Great,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Let's move on to the tree planting program update from Angie.
Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Give me just a second to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? Zoom always does some wild things. Okay, great. All right, well, thanks everyone for having me today. My name is Angie DeSalvo. I use she, her pronouns, and I am our Science Outreach and Planting Manager here at Urban Forestry. And I am thrilled to bring you some updates on what we've been up to around tree planting. My plan is to talk for 15 minutes. I'm going to try and keep it short so that I can save most of the time for questions. I would love to have comments and to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to talk quickly and please hold your comments to the end and we'll have a great discussion. Okay, so as you heard from Jen, urban forestry does plant across all property types. Of course, we work in our parks. We are also the tree planters for the city's interagency partners, such as Water Bureau, Fire Bureau, etc. One of our longest running programs is Learning Landscapes, where we plant trees at schools with children and volunteers. We also do a lot of work on private property, and about 60% of our available space for canopy, new canopy, is actually in private residential yards. So we do a lot of work to get trees distributed and planted in private yards. And of course, we also work in the city's right-of-way planting street trees. So our program is guided by our citywide tree planting strategy, growing a more equitable urban forest. And if I had to sum it up in short, it's that we're really trying to decrease the disparity in canopy between folks with trees and folks without. And so a lot of our focus and effort is on bringing trees to places where they're needed the most. And that is really the basis of all of our work. My particular team, I have about 40 full-time employees in science outreach and planting. About half of those are in the planting team. And our work involves outreach, getting the word out there about tree planting and signing folks up. We do tree procurement. We do planting via contractors, in-house crews, volunteers, and private residents. And of course, we do a lot of establishment care, particularly with our street trees, and we monitor our work and get that feedback loop going so that we know how our programs are doing. And our programs have really been growing since about 2018, and we have been in build and grow mode for a long time. A lot of new funding sources around 2018 are Title 11 Tree Planting and Preservation Fund established baseline funding for us to start doing this work. That was supplemented by our Parks Operations Levy. And now, in a very exciting moment, as of last year, the Portland Clean Energy Fund has allocated funding for increased tree planting. And so we are rapidly growing and working to expand the work we do over the next 4 years so that we can meet a very ambitious 15,000 tree goal for PSEF. And that's that orange yellow growth that you see. That's in addition to sort of our baseline funding. And there's a heck of a lot of work being put into growing that program. We're very excited to be partnering with PSEF. If there's one takeaway that I want you to have today, it's that our planting is based in centering racial equity. And we do that in 2 primary ways. One is where we plant. This is a map of what we call our priority service areas, and the darker blue is the focus area for where we center our programs. And we use real-time data, up-to-date information on where we have the lowest canopy, where we have lowest incomes, and where we have communities of color. Those are our focus areas for how we deliver our services. A second way that we center equity is how we plant and who we pay to do the work. And a lot of our work is done by contractors. And so we are aiming to work with contractors that typically haven't gotten funding from the city, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, emerging and small businesses, et cetera. So as we develop our planting programs, we're really working hard to keep equity at the center of our work. So I'm going to touch on some of our programs today. I can't cover everything, but I'll give you highlights of some of the work that we're doing this year in the right-of-way and on city and private property. The first is our improved rights-of-way planting. You may hear us refer to that as free street trees. And we are planting about 800 trees this year in the what we call improved or developed rights-of-way, where we have curbs and sidewalks.
Angie, can you wait a
Yes.
second?
Yes.
Thanks.
It's the earthquake practice.
This is the great shakeout earthquake practice. At this time, we should all hunker under something more solid than our own bodies. As a dedicated city employee, I will demonstrate getting under the table.
We'll be back in a sec, Angie.
Okay.
Good job, Casey.
I'm private. I'm staying in my seat. Does remind me of the elementary school drills.
I know my
Everyone under
daughter's
our
homesick
seat.
today, and I was like, should I make her practice? Because she would be doing it at school.
I think in our case in the 80s, it was like nuclear something. The hunkering
Well,
down wouldn't have done anything for us, but we practiced.
I grew up in California, so we did this a lot.
Yeah, far more legit for earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about this yesterday. My place of employment, like what's gonna fail and what's not, and where we sit.
That's right. Sounds good. Sorry to interrupt, Angie. Please continue.
No
Sorry,
problem.
Angie.
For
Glad
you
to-
guys.
Always good to break it up for a minute.
Yeah, I elected to not.
Yeah. Okay, so our improved rights-of-way trees, we're planting about 800. We rotate around amongst our priority service areas. You can kind of see them outlined in blue there on the map, but those green dots do indicate where trees will be going in this season. And we do this via an opt-out method, which means that we, Urban Forestry surveys the neighborhood, we find locations, and then we notify the property owner that the city is coming to plant trees. And property owners are given the opportunity to say no if they want to decline the tree. Otherwise, the city will plant and we will maintain for 3 years, including all establishment care, watering, etc. And we currently have about an opt-out rate of about 40%, so about 60% of folks accept the offer of trees. And one thing that I'm really excited about is that last year, we wanted to really know how folks are perceiving and understanding this program. So our outreach staff went door to door to go visit with folks who had had a tree planted for 2 seasons. And I don't know if you've read any Yelp reviews lately, but we got a 4.3 out of 5, which is an amazingly high satisfaction rate for folks to say, yeah, I'm really pleased with this city program where a tree was installed in front of my home. So I'm very proud of the team for collecting that data and really getting the feedback that we so needed, which has been overwhelmingly positive about the program. One other nugget of info, we learned that more than half of participants would never have planted a tree if they didn't have this opportunity. So we are, with this particular program, we're really accessing a lot of spaces where there have been barriers to getting trees planted, and we're able to do that cost-free for all of the residents. So look for our trees coming in soon. We are also this year piloting an under-improved rights-of-way program, whereby we are getting trees planted in right-of-ways where you do not have a curb or a sidewalk or even a paved road or distinguished planting strip. This is our pilot year. A lot of these areas are located in East Portland or areas that have typically been underserved by the city. And so when we plant street trees, we need to find ways to get canopy and street trees in under-improved areas. Otherwise, we're skipping a huge area in the city. And so we're working very closely with PBOT to develop some good guidance that works for both bureaus on where trees are placed. We want to make sure we avoid any future development as best as we can. We don't want to put a tree in and then have it come out if that roadway gets improved. And we're doing this by opt-in. So we're asking people to voluntarily sign up, and we hope to do about 200 trees in our pilot year. And there's huge room for expansion once we kind of dial everything in. We have more than 160 miles of frontage just in our priority 1 areas alone that could qualify for this. So we're really excited to get this tested out and in place. Another program you hear us talk about a lot is our yard tree giveaway, which focuses on private residential yards. This year, we have grown to 3,000 trees, up from 2,000 last year, thanks to PSEF funding. And here we focus on providing large, native, and evergreen trees, especially those that are low maintenance, drought tolerant, and easy to care for. And we start doing outreach in the summer. Registration opens in September, and then folks can come and pick up a tree at one of our 6 drive-through events. They get mulch, they get a watering bucket, they get detailed information on how to plant and care for their tree. And we also offer consultation with an arborist, delivery, and planting for anyone that needs it. And currently about a quarter of our trees are delivered directly to property owners' homes. One exciting development this year is that we were able to engage 4 different nonprofit contractors to do paid outreach for us, all focused in our priority service areas. So we were super excited to work with Taking Ownership, the Centennial Community Association, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and Green Lens. And it's been amazing to actually be able to pay small nonprofit groups who work directly with the communities that we want to connect with and to bring those opportunities just directly to communities. So we're hoping to expand on that next year. We're reviewing that pilot and more good things to come there. And then the last program I'll touch on is our private property trees program. You may have heard that in July, as part of our government restructure process, the Bureau of Environmental Services tree program was consolidated and brought to urban forestry, and we now manage that program. And this year, that predominantly means that we are taking care of trees that are under establishment. There are about 2,700 trees that were transferred to us for management. The vast majority of those are at private property sites, especially in commercial, industrial, and multifamily sites. But there are some, about 500, that are in the public right-of-way. So the team is currently working on updating data, transferring records to our system. We're visiting all of the trees to do a health assessment. And then we're planning for future work. This is a separate, although it was the BES program, formerly, it is now being funded through the Clean Energy Fund. And so we are bringing contracts into compliance with PSEF requirements like minimum wage and demographic reporting. And then we'll be working to plant more trees in future years through this funding source. It's been a great transition, and I'm super thankful to the BES staff. They've been so helpful in helping make this smooth and seamless for property owners. And then one more takeaway on our tree monitoring study. Jen mentioned some of our great survival rates. And really that comes because we have been out there collecting data in a long-term monitoring study that we initiated in 2018 when we started planting. And so just to let you know, we have a partnership with the U.S. Forest Service where they have guided and advised us on how to collect monitoring data. We have thousands of trees enrolled in this to help us get a sample of how we're doing. And so far, we're seeing great things and getting excellent feedback to help us improve our programs. Looking at national rates for tree survival year to year, we're doing pretty darn well, between like 93 to 96%, depending on which program you're looking at, all on the very high end of what you typically see nationally. And we're also getting really great feedback on our yard trees. You know, we were always curious, okay, if we pass out this yard tree, is it getting planted? Is it getting planted well? Are folks getting at the right depth? Are they installing mulch? And are they living year to year? And so the takeaways are really that, yeah, they're getting planted. They are getting distributed, and they're doing really well. So I encourage you to check out our monitoring stats. We post them every year in our planting report. I put the link in there for you to check out. We try to be very transparent with our results and data and make sure that they're out there for the public to use. And then lastly, to close, one big focus for our team currently is that we are trying to find and engage more contractors for tree planting and establishment. We estimate that we need 8 to 10 medium to large size contractors to get to the goals that we have. And so we are hosting workshops to publicize upcoming opportunities. We have one on Tuesday at the Holgate Library. And we are looking for folks from small all the way to large. We have a big RFP coming out this winter, and there's just a lot of contracting work. I'll just say that. So please pass that word around. I'm happy to share with folks, and we'll make sure you get the presentation, but there's a QR code for our upcoming workshop, and hope to see some of you or your contracting friends there. Okay, I'm going to stop so that you have time for questions, and happy to answer anything I can.
Commissioner McMillan.
Yeah, I have a couple. First, are you tracking, I guess it's the Learning Landscapes program. Are you tracking current projects with PPS that are under construction? As far as how those would, have these opportunities for additional tree planting?
Yeah, we actually work with multiple school districts. So PPS, Centennial, David Douglas, et cetera. So we're working not just with PPS, but many other schools out there. And we typically don't get involved in their development process. But we are very careful to actually avoid that to make sure that they're able to meet their mitigation and requirement pieces for planting. That's kind of handled through their permit end. Typically where we come in is when there's no construction happening and there's a need for green on the school grounds. So we make sure that what we're planting doesn't interfere with development efforts. We want those trees to be there in the long run. And does that answer your question, Melinda?
Yeah, tracking that process, yes. I think maybe we could be a little more proactive with those school districts to help them meet their tree mitigation and landscape percentages. They might have a hard time figuring out how to do that. And now we have the opportunity of introducing kind of the large form trees into their vocabulary where that might not be part of their standards. And we could help them kind of update their standards to, I just see that as an opportunity. Yeah. My second question was, are these successes, are these the great findings with the data, are they going to be publicized beyond the website? Is it, going to be part of a media campaign so we have a little more good press out there?
Yeah, as much as we provide that information when we do get media inquiries, they can be selective in what they publish. For example, all of that great info was provided when you guys probably saw some of the not so happy stories coming out around tree establishment. So Jen, you're probably better poised to answer that question about media response, but we do try to very publicly share that information. We don't necessarily do a lot of proactive press releases, but I love the suggestion. And I think when we have resources to do more communication and marketing, that absolutely should be front and center.
Commissioner Klott.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all. I wanted to kind of dovetail on that. And I brought it up before. Also, as the representative with PSEF, we brought this up about getting essentially a public relations person out in front of all these things to really get as much information out there as possible. And I know, Angie, you just said when we get more resources, you have a lot of people underneath your purview, 40 people, which is huge and incredible. But I think there should be enough resources to have urban forestry get on the front foot with what used to be called education and outreach. I think that should be a higher priority to get in front of things so that when there are media things, they are the minority of what people are hearing. Because right now they're the majority. So I think that there should be a better allocation of resources to really put that kind of public messaging out in a better way.
I can respond to that. Thank you for the comment, Commissioner Clapp. We all in urban forestry absolutely agree, and for a long time have been working towards that. A couple things to recognize. You know, we're part of a larger structure that controls communication. And so, you know, we put requests in for information, and it's not entirely up to us what gets picked up and sent out to the world. As Angie mentioned, what gets picked up by media outlets is also separate. My own experience is government doing good work doesn't always sell well in media outlets. It's more the other way. And then second of two things, you all have heard us talk about the new PSEF funding. We're calling it tree protection and care. And we mentioned it this morning related to street tree maintenance. That is included in that tree protection and care. But we have planned to use some funds from tree protection and care, the PSEF funds, to develop a new urban forestry education position that would lead public communications. Everything from the trees are good type campaigns and all the services and benefits folks get from trees to you may need a permit, here's how to get one, and things like maintaining your trees, planting trees, tree selection. So we're really looking forward to that. It's the first time we've ever had funding that we could dedicate to that purpose. It will not be housed in the science outreach and planting team. It'll be in the city forester's office because it will be working with our entire organization, everything from tree emergency response system to permitting and regulation, as well as our proactive tree planting programs. Does that help?
Thanks, Jen.
Yes, it does help. Thank you.
Commissioner Plack.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on this conversation, and I just been thinking about our public comment this morning and not seeing a lot of trees be planted, and it made me think about, like, I feel that in my neighborhood, I have seen a lot of trees be planted, but I'm sure it depends on where you live, right? Like, what are the priority neighborhoods? And so this is just an interesting, we've talked about this before in our democratic process, like, and I'm not speaking for anyone in specific, but just generally, like the folks that we're going to hear from in our meetings may not always be the folks who are getting trees in their neighborhoods right now. So that's just something that it makes me think about. Like, yeah, what you see is going to depend on where you are in Portland.
We have 1 minute left, so yes.
I would like to see in the tree planting report, I think there should always be costs associated. There's no money mentioned here at all. I think that's inappropriate, but if that's what urban forestry wishes to do, I think that does not convey accurate information, just to say this is what we did. What did it cost you?
Yeah, and I would say kind of related to that, it would be lovely to have Angie come back. This is like phenomenal work, but it'd be nice to sort of see, okay, who are the contractors, who, what, where, you know, what are the changes over time, costs, and these plantings, like the map for the plantings, look, you know, a little bit more on that. Commissioner Meissner?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Do we collect data on the reason why 40% of people opt out of receiving street trees?
Yes, we sure do. We survey every single one, and the overwhelming reason is perceived maintenance cost. So folks have said, if you maintain the tree, I might say yes. And we also know that the vast majority of folks who declined have lived in their homes for 10 plus years. So if they had wanted a tree, they would have planted one. They're not interested, and they are assigning that to long-term maintenance cost.
Yeah, along that line, you know, including in some future presentation, kind of incentives, disincentives, what exists now, what could be, you know, trying to think about various ways to get that, you know, decline rate down. Certainly the maintenance is one great part of it.
Yeah.
Let's see, a comment. Weirdly, I was glad to see 40% decline because it meant people, received the opt-out information and could navigate the process. That's interesting. Yeah, I'd actually be concerned if that number was very small. Yeah, I mean, good point, Leah, but yeah, it'd be fun to hear more about that whole process.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments and more than happy to come back at any point and provide more information. We're obviously thrilled to be doing this and would love to share it more with you all. It's very public facing. We feel we're doing great work and getting the word out there. You guys can certainly play a great role in helping us with that.
Great, thanks so much. I'm gonna move us over to our next agenda item, which is from Belinda Udelman. And yes, and Portland Urban Forest Plan.
Great, thank you, everyone. And while Belinda's ramping up, Chairperson Feldstein, I wanted to point out something in the chat. Brian just put in there.
Thank you.
To
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson's question about expense, most of the funding comes from the Tree Planting and Preservation Fund. We publish annual reports on revenue and expenses here, and there's a link to that.
Okay,
Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Belinda Udelman. I'm a planning and policy analyst with Urban Forestry and the project manager for the Portland Urban Forest Plan. I'm excited to give you all an update on what we've been working on since we were last here. So I'll focus mostly on canopy goals, what they are, kind of where we've moved since we were last year talking about them. And then we'll have a discussion of how you think we should be setting them, like how high should we aim or how low. And then we will talk about the recommendations and implementation strategy. So these are the steps and actions that we'll be taking to achieve our goals. And then we'll have some time for discussion about that, as well as providing an opportunity or discussing the ways that you can provide additional feedback after today. And then I'll end by talking about our next steps. We're very close to being ready to share a draft plan for release, so I'll share more about that. So first, talking about canopy goals. Some people also call these canopy targets. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about and what we're trying to achieve as part of this plan. So canopy goals are a good way for us to measure how much of the city we want to be covered by trees or the urban forest. They're very a common approach that cities use to measure kind of the size and distribution of our urban forest and the benefits of our urban forest and how that may vary across the community. So each of our goals is going to have these three components that are highlighted in the different colors on the slide. So in this example, which says increase canopy citywide to 33% by 2035, citywide is our sort of analysis or measurement unit. So we'll be setting different measurement units as part of our goals, not just citywide. And then 33%, that's the measure, so the percentage of how much tree canopy we want. And then 2035 is our deadline to get there. So all of our goals will have each of those components, so it's clear what we're doing, how we're gonna measure it, and how long we have to achieve that goal. This goal on the slide, this is just an example. This is not what we're proposing as part of the plan. Just to be clear about that. So one of the key things that we've been thinking about, and we talked at our last meeting when we were here, is just that our current approach, which one of which is a citywide goal, it really falls short when we're thinking about equitable distribution if we're just measuring at the citywide scale. So that's something that the project team has been really focusing on. What are the other ways, other analysis or measurement units we can use to help make sure we're tracking progress to make sure that everyone can benefit from trees, not just people on the west side have a lot of canopy now. I'm gonna kind of go very quickly through this slide because we spent a lot of time talking about this at our last presentation, just saying that when we set our canopy goals, we want to make sure we're considering a lot of different factors, like alignment with other city plans and policies, where we have canopy, where we have potential for more canopy. Also thinking about how we can be strategic and intentional with how we're setting our goals.
being considerate of our urban form and land use. So what does the city look like? What is our built environment? How is it designed? And how is that different in different parts of the city? So for example, in East Portland, we have a lot fewer planting strips, which means we have to, if we want trees there, we need to plant in a different way if we're gonna look at planting trees in the right of way. Whereas in inner neighborhoods, there are planting strips. So just a different approach and wanting to be considerate of that. Also making sure we're thinking about our vulnerable or underserved populations. So communities of color, low income communities, where are those communities located? How is their access to canopy? Urban heat islands and habitat, where are the hardest parts of the city? Where are we providing habitat? Where do we want to provide habitat so we can improve connectivity? Watershed health. And then last, just being pragmatic with our approach and making sure that we're selecting boundaries that are actually clear, that we can measure them, and that we can be consistent with that measurement over time. So this is what we presented last time as a recommended approach. We have since spoken with more staff, spoken to other advisory committees, and are wanting to move forward with this approach for the way that we measure the canopy goals. So we would have a citywide goal, much like the example I shared at the beginning. We would have a goal for our street trees or transportation right of way. Then we would have these geographic areas, which is what's shown in the image on the slide. So these, in case you don't remember, these were developed by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability as part of their comprehensive plan. So they divide the city into different parts based on urban form mostly. And so we have the western part of the city on the west side of the river. We have the central city, downtown core, inner east side, inner neighborhoods, and then the eastern neighborhoods, East Portland and a little bit of northeast as well. And our rivers, which is rivers and industrial areas along Columbia and Willamette. And then since we've also heard a lot of support and interest in wanting something at the neighborhood level, we are planning to continue to have a one minimum threshold. So the idea would be that we want all neighborhoods to have a minimum level of access to canopy. So that might be, we're still working on setting the goal, but it might be a 20%, 25% canopy cover, and we'd be using that to focus our efforts on neighborhoods that don't yet meet that goal. So switching gears a little bit to that's sort of the how are we going to measure the goals? What's the analysis unit? So this is how are we setting that percentage for each of those areas is what I want to talk about now. So we would start by seeing how much canopy we have now, what's our current coverage, what's our potential canopy coverage, and then from there kind of work through these other steps to get to our ultimate goal. So we would adjust based on a review of industry and peer city guidance, but then also adjust based on our local values and community feedback. So things like, you know, how aggressive do we want to be with our canopy to help us be more resilient towards climate change? How much more do we want to work to provide better habitat or better serve our underserved communities and increase canopy and lower canopy areas? So that's what I will hear from all of you in a minute. And then we also will adjust our numbers just to make sure that what we're recommending is feasible. It's thinking about where we have control for planting, how much planting we do, what could we expect to actually achieve. So this first step we've already done. We've analyzed our existing canopy cover and estimated our potential. I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but just for example, at the citywide scale, we currently have a 29 to 30% canopy cover, but we estimate that we have potential for 52%. So what we could have in the city is much higher than where we are. And then thinking about how we would apply industry guidance. So again, we talked about this a little bit last time, but as a refresher, there's guidance, national guidance that says cities in forested states, so Portland is one of those, that they should have citywide canopy goals of 40 to 60%. And there's also also national guidance that says cities should select a goal that is 75 to 100% of their potential. So if we have our potential of 52%, what's 75 or 85, 95% of that 52%. So those numbers are what's shown in the bottom graphic. So for example, 75% of our 52% potential would put us at a goal of 39%. So all of that is to say that based on industry guidance and what we've seen commonly used in other cities, we're thinking about a citywide goal that's in the 40 to 50% range, just based on the guidance. So before we move to our discussion, I just want to move away from the numbers and give us some visuals, things to keep in mind. So this next series of slides shows the percentage canopy cover that's in the right of way. So it's just talking about sidewalks and streets. If you can see it, there's a red box in the lower left-hand corner. So that's the part of this image that we're talking about. So in this example, this is a street in Southeast and Lentz, Duke, one of the hottest streets in the city, actually. No canopy cover in the right of way. And in this example, a little bit more of a typical residential street for some of our neighborhoods, but still very narrow planting strips, pretty small trees. But even in this situation, we have up to 30% canopy cover in the right of way. And here, dense urban area, downtown. There's on-street parking, there's outdoor seating, a lot of uses in the street, but we still managed to fit in 45% canopy cover. This example, North Portland, more residential area, quite a wide street, so wide that we've been able to put in a median. Here we've got 55% canopy cover. And then last, one of our most canopied streets in the city near Ladd's Addition, 96% canopy cover. So lots of canopy here. And again, this is just looking at canopy cover, distribution of canopy. We're not measuring like quality or diversity with this goal. So I'd like to open it up for discussion and hear if you have any concerns or questions about our approach. And also ask what you think we should strive for our goals. Should they be purely aspirational, something that maybe we'll never achieve, or would require a huge change in how we do things, or a high goal that's a big challenge, but is still something that we could achieve in 50 to 60 years with a lot of work and some funding. More of a medium goal that's a challenge, but achievable in the shorter term, or a low goal. So pretty close to what we're doing now, just a little more effort maybe, it could be achieved in 20 years. And I also will just say, I want to recognize that we are in a state currently of canopy decline. So really any goal we choose is going to be, if it's higher, it's going to be a big lift no matter what.
Discussion, folks, any thoughts, questions, comments? Commissioner Meissner.
Hey, thank you. Question about what we have as the potential canopy. Is that for like the entire city, including like private property, or is that just like right of way?
Yeah, great question. It is for the entire city. Jeff Ramsey on our science outreach and planting team, he developed a methodology back in 2018 to analyze canopy potential. And so it looks at public and private property. It considers existing canopy, it considers our land use and plan development. All of those different things kind of factor into that.
So I didn't see if Megan or Casey was next, but I'll just, do you guys know? Who was first?
Let Casey
Sure.
go.
All right, Commissioner Clapp.
Sounds good. Thank you. I don't have any concerns with the approach based on what you've shown. I think in terms of what we're doing, consistent with comments that I and Commissioner Nelson made and other people I think also agreed with or at least made, I think we should shoot for a high or aspirational goal. I think a medium goal is kind of reasonable, but I think that we should be shooting for the stars. And if we do get somewhere, or rather if we say this is our goal, then that gives a little bit more, I think, it gives a little more ammunition for us to say, we need more help. We want to do this. Like, here's our goal based on all of our studies, so that people say, okay, we're going to help fund this and push this forward. If we just make a low goal, it doesn't seem like that's important. So I think making a high goal to show how important it is would be, at the minimum, a thing that we should do.
Thank you. Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, two quick things. One, Belinda, in the presentation at some point, there was the maps, the various kind of maps that you're comparing to, including one about canopy potential. And right, when I looked at that, I see East Portland and I see the outer edge of North Portland. And I feel like I say this all the time, but I feel like aspirationally, we need to talk how we are going to plant trees in heavy industrial areas and remove existing exemptions, because if not, we're going to continue to not have trees in those areas. So I just have to say, aspirationally, as a North Portland resident that lives very close to these areas, that needs to be part of our aspiration. And then secondly, just to kind of follow up on what Casey shared, I think that I'd almost put it like we're cooking and we're going to cook on like medium high heat over here. We don't want to burn what we're doing here. Like, we don't want to shoot too high, but if we shoot too low, we're going to honestly only harm ourselves. I think about when we talk to city council, when we talk to other city makers of decisions, we have to be able to say that we set this goal. And if we don't have a high enough goal to be aspirational, they don't have any reason to try to push beyond that standard. So I think we have to give ourselves something to reach for. I don't want it to be so unrealistic. Like, we say we're going to plant 1 million trees. That's not realistic, but like something that is a reach for us, so that we can use it to drive change in funding.
Commissioner McMillan.
Yes, just a couple comments that, I'm looking at this both from the lens of internal goals as urban forestry, but also the city overall climate goals. I mean, we are key to the city achieving overall climate goals when we look at the 30 to 60 years. And have we discussed the potential with other city departments? That this sounds, egotistically, I think urban forestry is very key to the city addressing overall climate goals. And so are we setting these goals in tandem with other input, things like that? That's my first comment.
Yeah, I can respond to that. So we have shared this. We've already shared this same question with our technical advisory committee, which includes staff from 8 or 9 other bureaus, county and state and metro. And they're on board with this approach. And we talked a lot about aiming on the higher side, especially those staff who are at the county and very involved in the climate work at that level, but also staff in other bureaus. We're also kind of similarly thinking that it's to our advantage to aim high, even if it's something a little higher than what we can really achieve.
Okay. Brian, did you want to address that before I go on to my second point?
No, I had something else to add, but you go
Okay.
on, finish your motion first.
And I was just thinking of, the maps, and we're looking at industrial areas and, equity issues. But when we're looking at kind of high and aspirational, when we're going 50, 60 and beyond, we're then talking about canopy replacement and the lifespan of current mature trees. And so looking at high and aspirational goals, of course, I want to hit high, but we also need to have a plan of replacing the mature trees that are going to be declining at that point, if not, sooner. I was just wondering if that was factored into kind of these plans.
Yeah, so we are thinking about planting. That's kind of in our sort of models of thinking about what's feasible. Thinking about the planting side is in some ways the easiest. Okay, how many trees could we plant? Of course, there's many thousands of trees that can be planted on private property that we don't have data for, so that's an unknown. And then we also have to make assumptions about the canopy that we can preserve, because we definitely see the most growth in our canopy from existing trees, not from planting new trees. So definitely preservation is a huge part of this.
Awesome.
And then, I was just gonna note too, that one of the ways we're trying to think about this is ensuring that whatever goal we set, we have a pathway to achieving it. And so some sort of additional analysis we're looking at is, when we look at that canopy potential, trying to break it down to like, where is that potential? And so looking at things like how much of that potential canopy is coming from street trees or potential space on city-owned or managed properties. So those are areas where we might have a little bit more control, a little bit more ability to plant and expand canopy there. And then kind of breaking it down further by land use. How much is in residential and commercial, and how much is in industrial areas, which we know is one of the hardest places to grow canopy. So just a little note as we start to assess what the feasibility of this is, we're trying to see, well, how much of this canopy growth is a little more directly under the management that we have and our ability to change it, and how much is maybe requiring more changes to city code, like in industrial areas, or what our planting programs look like, because we identify which are the areas that are gonna be hardest to plant.
Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts. I don't see any other hands, so I'll just chat. Oh, Leah, do you want to go first? Commissioner Platt?
Sure, sorry. Yeah, I like this discussion a lot. I think I brought this up before, but my one concern, kind of speaking to what Brian just said, is let's make sure it's achievable, because we also see broadly, like there's a lot of big promises being made to Portlanders with this upcoming election. And I do worry a little bit about promising or striving for something that's not really achievable, and what that does with trust, because we really need people to have trust in what the urban forestry can do if we eventually want to see those opt-out numbers decrease of who wants to get trees planted, et cetera. So just something we should keep in mind, like we want to shoot high, but not so high that folks are just like, well, that's, they can't deliver. We're not delivering on what we said we would try to do. And kind of going back to what Commissioner McMillan said about replacement, I have questions about that too, because we all know of lots of trees around town that if they were to be removed, you could never plant a tree with the current code of that size in that same space, which would then, we would never get that canopy back. Is that something we're kind of factoring into projections as we think about the goals we're setting and how to meet those goals?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing what we can. We'll have to make some assumptions in the model to get there, but I think right now, given that canopy, it's declined slightly. So that means what we're growing and what we're losing are kind of canceling out. So we could expect, I think that change will probably continue, but also hopefully we'll reverse that trend a little bit. So in that way, we're considering it. And I think also when we get into our thinking about our neighborhood goals in the different parts of the city, there's certainly concentrations of some of those areas where there are those narrow planting strips where those trees may not get replaced. we can factor that into those areas. But to counter that, we also have recommendations and actions to help us overcome some of those barriers so that maybe we don't actually lose all of those trees. So combination.
Yeah, I'll add to that, it can also influence what sort of future tile weapon changes that we have. An example of that is right now, if a tree is removed, the replacement tree doesn't have to be the same size and can be potential as a tree that was lost. So there's ways to respond to that, but it means that like right now, that could potentially lead to canopy decline, even if we're getting replacement plantings. So is that a code change? Is that a change to the incentives we provide as part of that to ensure that we're replacing canopy and not losing it over time? So yeah, all those things have to be factored into.
Commissioner Clark, I think was first, and then Commissioner Nelson.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I wanted to note also about this, again, this kind of goes along with PSEF, with trying to figure out where to plant things. And I want to know if, and I think you kind of mentioned it a few times, but if there is just a kind of list that you have been creating that talks or that covers all of those limitations that you're finding, a bunch of them were just brought up. And I'm curious if you could just make a big list that says, here are all the limitations that we're trying to address. In certain sections of the city, the right-of-way is too small. And then add to that what would need to be addressed, what would need to change without any real consideration of, the management or the permits or what would happen, just kind of a very high level. We have no planter strips in this area or not enough room in the right-of-way for planter strips. In order to address that, we would need more space or bump outs, or we need to create planter spaces by digging in, or change city code so that small trees are planted, policy so that small trees are planted in smaller spots. Anyway, do you have anything like that would kind of be very black and white in terms of here's the issue and here's what we need to change?
I don't have any like a written down list of that, but I have thought about that for like the different geographic areas of doing something like that in the plan, so that it's a little clearer. Okay, these are the strategies we need in this area. These are the strategies we need in this area. So yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion.
Awesome. And I think that would also help just quickly in terms of the planting through PSEF and other agencies, is that if there is money that can be put towards something like that, then if you said, yeah, we could plant a bunch of things right here, but this road needs a sidewalk with a curb and an obvious planter strip. And if that's the case, then that could be something that money could be put towards, build that infrastructure for this community, and as a part of that, plant the trees. I think that we're starting to get money at the level that we can start to do that, look into that at a larger scale. So it'd be nice if that was included here. That way it can be, as a part of the management plan, something we look towards and say, hey, here's some issues that the management plan calls out. Here's how they could address them. So we're going to put money towards those addresses. So I think that might be helpful.
Great idea. Commissioner Nelson.
I wanted to reinforce something I think Brian said and Casey touched on it. I think it really is a citywide goal. I know it's useful, but I really think it's the canopy goals in much smaller areas that will help us in the future identify if we're falling short in one area, but we're doing great in the others. Okay, let's focus our energy in the industrial area. Or if it's residential neighbors areas we're not meeting our canopy goal, then let's focus there. I think it would allow for nimble activity on the part of urban forestry and perhaps nonprofits or whatever tree planting and tree care entities there are. So, and the citywide goal should actually be an accumulation of all these smaller goals, and then, okay, how does that all fit and what's the number it gives you? But, so I like smaller, more manageable, identifiable units that you can figure out, are we doing it or not? And what do we need to change?
I think Commissioner Vandermark was next.
Well, maybe separate but similar to at least what Casey is saying. I feel like I would love, man, I feel like such a broken record, and I apologize. But like to put that our goal is to have a long-term funding strategy for the city taking over street tree maintenance, because I don't think we're going to hit our canopy goals without it. So I think that, like that kind of to Angie's point earlier, and I know this from, the work that I do and talking to community members, people will keep saying no until we have a dedicated strategy for, maintaining the street trees. So I think that has to be part of this.
Yeah, that is, we did add that as its own goal for dedicated funding for city responsibility for street tree maintenance.
Yeah, and maybe
We heard you.
after Commissioner Meiser's comment, we can go to the rest presentation, which gets into the actions. So, yeah.
Commissioner Meiser.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I want to thank Commissioner Nelson for his comments. I also agree that I think there should be a big focus on like goals for like smaller areas, like specific neighborhoods. So that way, like Commissioner Nelson said, we can act nimbly. And also, I just feel like that creates more equity in that each specific area can create the goals that suit that area. So that way we're not forcing like trees where it could create potential conflict, and each area is getting the tree coverage that benefits that they find beneficial to them. Because when we talk about equity, we're looking at not just the number of trees, but the actual effect of the trees in the areas.
Suggestion. Yeah, I think at this point we talked about sending a single minimum, but I think a good next step could be working with community, thinking about goals. We'd have to think more about that. Yeah, it's a great suggestion.
Yeah, a
Did you have
couple
a
of
comment
comments,
before I
yeah, so the timeframes, this is a great presentation, really well thought out, in terms of where you're, and I think all the commissioners were heading and want to see. The timeframes are not well supported based upon, either what have other cities achieved over time, or, for example, let's do some modeling, what's the PSAF staffing we expect, what's there for the number of trees, where could it go based upon funding, different scenarios over the next probably 5 to 10 years is sort of a little more important. 50 to 60 years, it's like the who knows, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll just make a couple of comments actually based, so, a part of my job in quality was having to kind of set these metrics. And one of the approaches we took, and that's in medicine, it's totally different, but sometimes thinking about it in like a different framework is helpful. And so we would have these baseline and then kind of minimum expected, we called it threshold or threat or stretch targets for each thing. And that might be a right way to play it, especially with the overall goal, but probably more importantly, and I think you heard this from other commissioners, with more targetable, more specific achievable goals lately. So I was in the private sector. There's actually financial incentives tied to all that. It's probably something that the city can't do, but there's other ways of doing potentially incentives for teams, where you have to achieve your threshold to get any kind of incentive, and you get a better incentive with stretch. So I think you heard a lot of interest in aspirational and high goals, which to me makes sense if you're talking about 50 to 60 years where we don't really know where we're even going to be, if we're going to be alive, right? So many factors. But to be more reasonable, which is not to say you shouldn't have a high goal or a stretch goal for the specific things, but have better timeframes when we really understand, can we possibly ever achieve that by adding this all up? So I just would encourage a little bit more modeling around this.
Yeah, we have.
With the experts on your teams.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, I think for any different goal, whether it's, 35, 40, 45, 50, we are looking at calculating, okay, how many trees do we think we would need to plant?
Yeah.
Obviously, we can just account for what
Cool.
we can do and how does that compare to what we're doing now. So how much more would we have to do? And then also, if we, select that higher goal that we think may take us 50, 60 years to achieve, we'll also be setting some shorter term goals to make sure we're tracking to meet. So like if the goal is 50%, 60 years, where do we need to be in 10 years? What would that short term goal be? So we'll be working on all of that. I do have a couple more things I wanted to get through too, if we're okay to keep
Yeah,
going.
go ahead, yeah.
Okay.
We have till 11:25.
Okay, so switching gears, hopefully you all received a copy of our the early draft of our recommendations and implementation strategy. So this is what we're doing to help us achieve our goals and our vision, which we've talked about a lot at previous meetings. So what are we actually doing and when? So briefly, how did we create our recommendation and implementation strategy? We reviewed our vision and goals, which were heavily informed from all of our advisory committees, including all of you, all of the focus groups and open houses and surveys that we've done. Also looked at general input from community about what are the challenges people are experiencing when it comes to planting and caring for trees. What are the types of programs people want to see? What are the ways they want the city to improve our management approach? We also reviewed staff input. So we did a lot of interviews with city staff to find out challenges and opportunities for improvement. And then also looked at existing plans, policies, and projects and ongoing programs. So wanting to make sure that what we're recommending is in alignment with existing efforts. Also looking for opportunities. There's many situations where we can just expand or slightly adjust what we're already doing rather than creating an entirely new program. So taking advantage of those opportunities. And also there are opportunities where we do need to create an entirely new program. So our recommendations have a mix of those ongoing programs, enhancements and new programs. So our recommendations and implementation strategy, at the moment, we have 7 different recommendations. And each of those recommendations is supported by, or will be supported as it gets created, an implementation strategy. So that has a series of actions. And then for each of those actions, there are assigned lead and support partners, a timeline, a cost estimate, and we're working on thinking of a way to highlight what are those actions where there's opportunities for community involvement, because we heard that was really important to people throughout our engagement. So what you have received a copy of is just the actions and recommendations, and as those are finalized, we'll be working with city staff to kind of figure out some of those other details like cost estimates, timelines, who needs to be involved. And then you'll have another opportunity to review after that. So the recommendations that we have drafted are on the screen. To prioritize the preservation and care of the urban forest, reduce the cost of tree care to Portlanders, create new space for tree planting, expand the urban forest through planting program expansion and collaboration, provide inclusive communication, training, and education about the urban forest and tree care, use data, tools, and monitoring to support climate adaptation and equitable distribution of canopy, and establish and update city codes, standards, and guidelines to improve community resilience and urban forest health. So I'm not going to go through all of the actions because there's about 60 of them and we don't have time for that right now. But just want to share some of the key items that we've put together. So we have actions to provide more support to property owners. So the street tree maintenance and starting that with funds from PSEF, as well as a program to provide financial assistance to support street care, to support tree care on private property. A lot of actions to improve communication and collaboration, both across city bureaus, within city bureaus, and then also between the city and the public, including creating a communication and education strategy, as was mentioned as a need earlier. Expanding our planting programs, so we can plant more trees in more places. Also, a lot of design or design related actions, so that we can be using different approaches to both improve growing conditions for our existing trees and also create new space for trees, or create larger spaces for trees. So some of those things include updating planting standards and creating soil volume standards, expanding PBOTS trees in the curb zone pilot to make it a more permanent program, looking at other materials we could be using in the right of way to improve conditions in more constrained or narrow areas. So those are some of the highlights. And I have some discussion questions. I know we don't have a lot of time and you may not have had an opportunity to review these actions already. So after today, you're welcome to email your comments. If you want to look through the list and provide specific actions, if there's things you don't understand, if there's things you think we should add or remove, are we generally on the right track? That's the kind of feedback that we're looking for at this stage. If anyone,
Do you think you could email the actions list too, because somehow, people, once the chat goes away, you know.
Lost forever.
That would be great. Questions, thoughts, anyone? Commissioner Vandermark.
Yeah, Belinda, thanks. I appreciate the synthesis here. I think a couple of slides ago, I think it was number 5, right? It's talking about the ways to engage the community. And I think I'd just like to see that more front and center, right? I clearly might be biased in what I do, but I believe our urban forest will thrive through a community invested approach. And I'd just like to see that a little more like prominently listed in it. I don't think I think this is the intent. I don't want to just talk about how do we like educate, the public about it and kind of include them, like how do we make them integral in the process, would be just something within that language and commitment.
Any other any other thoughts, questions? Commissioner Nelson.
I think sidewalk repair from tree damage needs to be somewhere in there. I just long-term, I think that's the only way you're gonna get community buy-in.
yeah, it is in the list. I agree.
Anything else? Good. We definitely look forward to continuing to hear more about this. Obviously, it's an area of intense interest for all of us. You got next steps?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I will review any additional comments that you all want to email to me or Brian. And then we will be working hard to actually set our canopy goals and finalize them, get all the details of our recommendations and implementation strategy. And we are working towards being able to wrap up our draft and release it to the public, and also have an open house in early 2025. So that'll be an opportunity to see the entire plan and comment on everything in it.
So we did get the actions, did they come in the email today or last night or?
They were posted to the content on the meeting page, but I just emailed them out directly to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I have a question. Are we going to before this is actually released, are we gonna get another opportunity to look at the very specific goals? Canopy goals, especially in the different areas and so forth, because we've had a discussion now, okay, is it aspirational, is it high, is it whatever? It would be nice, I think, for us to see that again.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back.
Commissioner Clapp?
Yeah, do we have any time on any agenda for the commission just to sit down and kind of go over this? Because, you know, whenever Belinda comes and it's wonderful when you do, it's nice to hear about it. But I don't know that we've had enough time or any specific structured time for us commissioners just to look at each other and say, what do you guys think? How do we want to do this? And I just think that might be kind of helpful for us to just come up with something so that we can review it, get our minds wrapped around it, and then actually just kind of talk about it with ourselves to see what we like and kind of get unified on what we can respond to right at the very end.
Special meeting, yeah, so Commissioner Meisner said maybe we could have a special meeting to go over the plan. Even one whole meeting dedicated to, you know, maybe receiving your very specific things in advance. And having, you know, a short presentation and having a very detailed, focused conversation with the commissioners, yeah. Cool.
We could do that. I think
Sounds good.
maybe just thinking of timeline, would January be the best time, since that's when we'd be doing the public review already, and then maybe it's a January review when it's a more finalized version of the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be the best for the project timeline, if that's okay to do it while it's live, or if you're wanting to do it before then.
Yeah.
I guess that's a question.
I had kind of thought maybe beforehand, because like the very last slide you had up there was, you know, questions, comments, what do you think? Like there was kind of 4 bullet points. So I suppose you're providing that to us now because you want those sometime soon. So I feel like sooner rather than later, so that we can actually give you answers to those questions before you. Does that make sense? And this is more for everybody, not just Belinda.
Yeah,
So just
as
to
a
clarify.
reminder,
Go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
attending these meetings
Yeah.
as our representative as well. And so in the interim, before, you know, we do have this comprehensive meeting of all of us, you could be, I don't know, feeding me talking points, or if I want to represent, you know, urban forestry in these meetings, I'm happy to take our concerns and comments and represent that in, you know, as I'm participating. So we can either discuss that as part of this, or you can get me notes before this happens.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like Commissioner Clapp that maybe you have some additional thoughts on the actions that you want to discuss, and so maybe having a discussion with Melinda first and may
No.
help.
That's not quite it. No, it's just that
Okay.
we have, you know, we hear, we get the presentation, and I just don't think there's been enough time for us as a whole commission to sit down and actually review it amongst ourselves and say, well, what do you think? You know, what do you think?
Yeah.
How's that? So that we can actually, instead of just individually giving our comments and what we think to Belinda every time she shows up, it would be nice if we say, yes, we think that this is a good idea. The Urban Forestry Commission has this. Here's what we kind of want to provide.
Got it.
Is there a
Okay.
December meeting?
Well, we're out of time.
So that's what I was gonna say, this is
Yes.
great, because we had the last 5 minutes of this meeting reserved to discuss the November and December agendas. And then so maybe we have that discussion, and then Belinda and I can touch base after this to kind of see how that can fit in with the project timelining as well.
Good.
Because that was a good question. We have a few items that were planned for November. And then we also wanted to acknowledge that the December meeting often is loosely attended with holidays and everything, so we wanted to talk with everyone about that as well, so. Yeah, so what we've had on the November agenda is, that's when we get into the budget season, and one of the Urban Forestry Commission's roles is to advise on annual budget preparations. We also have some heritage tree removals and potentially having the Dutch elm monitoring report that we do every year being briefed as well. So some time commitments in the November meeting. So maybe not enough time to commit entirely to additional urban forest plan conversations, but also an open question is whether commission is interested in meeting in December. The meeting would be on the 19th.
So, yeah, what's on, it sounds like we have a November agenda that's full, is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Yeah.
And so the question on the table is, do we want to meet in December or not? Sort of a common month for boards not to meet. But yeah, what do folks think?
I would just caution,
Yes.
if there was feedback on the plan, Linda, correct me, if we got feedback on the plan
Yeah.
in late December, it would probably be too late to incorporate in the public draft that goes out, right? Or did you think we could incorporate it?
It kind of depends on what it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, it can definitely be incorporated before it's finalized, but I have a feeling I think it would still be fine.
Okay. So that's an option, it sounds like.
Commissioner Vandermark.
Well, mine is kind of an adjacent comment, maybe trying to draw on Casey. So, like we have larger questions about the policy committee due to kind of dwindling representation. So the policy committee could be a space to actually have additional conversations as a dedicated time. So just to put out, sometimes instead of creating an additional meeting, we could utilize that meeting space either this month or potentially next month to have a conversation, and that be the priority space to do it. So just putting that idea forward.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Commissioner Meissner?
Thank you. Yeah, not specifically to this, but just a general future agenda item. And it related to the policy committee. And I feel a little guilty because I'm not involved with the policy committee, but I was wondering if we could have an agenda item where we kind of go more in depth about the committees that we have, or like creating more committees. Because I feel like it's like with the tree plan, this is a space where if we had like a dedicated committee to work on the tree plan, and then like the committee could come back and report and get general feedback from the rest of the commission, I feel like we could be a lot more productive in our work with having more committees focused on specific topics. So just a general suggestion for a meeting topic in the future.
Yeah, good point, good suggestion. Yeah.
And just to Commissioner Vandermark's recommendation, at the start of this process, we had a discussion of how the UFC wanted to be involved, if they wanted to have a standalone committee. And I think the decision was to have Melinda be the representative on the CAC, and that the policy committee would be the vehicle for having sort of more in-depth conversations. So if that's something policy committee or commissioners are interested in doing, we could definitely make that happen too.
Commissioner Clapp?
I think that's a great idea. I would love to go to the committee. My responsibilities are far reduced now. At least they will be by the end of this week. So I think that does actually make a lot of sense to have that as a space. So maybe, yeah, I'll do my best. Actually, I will show up on the 21st because I believe that's the next meeting the following Monday. But maybe we can do it this one and then the next one in case no one can, or not as many people can show up this time. But that would be, I think, the exact right moment. So very good idea. You've drawn.
Yeah, that's great. Let Linda and I touch base, make sure we can staff that. And if we can't, we might work with you all to propose a different time, just to make sure we can be there for the conversation.
And I'm not hearing like a strong opinion, either way on December. So maybe to think about whether we could usefully fill that with more input on urban forest plan or discussion of our existing committees or what have you.
That sounds great, yeah.
So, but if it makes more sense to cancel it, that's good too. Does that seem reasonable, guys?
Sounds great.
Okay. All right, very good. Well, thanks so much for a good meeting, and we'll